Hey, hey.
Hey,
Much
can you
better.
hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
That was really fucking annoying.
Yeah, no
Man,
problem. How long was that happening?
man, it must have been like it slowly got worse for the last 10, 15 minutes. To the
Oh
end,
shit.
at the end it was like echoes of echoes of echoes. It was
Uh, yeah,
hope
that's no bueno.
I hope it doesn't get on the video, but I hate to say it probably did.
Well, anyway, I mean, we can recap by saying this.
Yeah.
So, like, after the paradoxism, I was saying we need to bring that into practicality. And the reason why paradoxism, I think, can be used practically in day-to-day life, or at least has to, is because we have a clear sense now that Eastern philosophy and Western thought are not compatible, and that's what we need to do is to try to make them compatible. Now, Eastern philosophy deals with the individual well-being, meditation, transcendental sort of it deals with religiosity, the need for religiosity, make things sacred, without the dogma, or at least with minimized dogma. Whereas the West, doesn't do that. It's at the peril of individual sort of like well-being. It makes society more stable. So the Western thought has brought like democracy and all this kind of stuff. It brings stability economically, socially, and all this stuff. Within the complexity of human interaction, but at the cost of individual well-being, right? Because you have to go with these sort of totalitarian type religions to just sort of deal with the religious aspect. Okay, religiosity, here it is. You got to do this, you got to do that. Boom, we suppressed you in such and such a way, and then society can be stable. So
Well,
to sort of we need to merge the two, and I think that we can do that with the practical manifest of pure being, which is my plug. Like I said, it's what I'm trying to write, which is a sort of formula to bring paradoxism into like the everyday life. I think paradoxism is just the realization that all these concepts that we struggle with in our lives are actual paradoxes, and so you can accept both sides as being partly right, and the impossible being possible, and then to practically apply the this kind of ideology, well, we need to bring back art, and define art as being everything that has. It's not just a painting or something like that. It's everything that is not necessary to human survival. And an organization would be the opposite. Everything that is necessary for human survival. Um, and
okay.
so if we blur the lines between the two, there you go. I think you're starting to dance with a more cohesive society, but also that's geared towards better health and well-being for the individual. Like the cottage industry is a great example, right? Like if you were the son of a woodworker, well, you didn't just make the wardrobe and the bed sets and all this kind of stuff, and then just send it off to an artist to do the carvings and all the paintings to make the furniture that you built look nice. No, you were the artist as well. You built the the the, the furniture and made it look nice. You know what I mean? It was one and the same. We need to strive towards that.
hmm One I'm going to throw a curveball, like a completely different tact your way, because I mean, as much as you can make people believe this, if you don't think that there's always going to be sadists and people who are going to take advantage, like who are going to be unbalanced on the not art side, on the pure survival side,
Yeah.
and kind of fuck around. I think something that I've been sort of working on is just kind of you have the paradoxism point of view, which gives you a general central idea of how to live your life. But
Or is how to no more of how to think about life,
yeah, okay,
how to live your life,
it's kind of the attitude that you have towards life, right?
uh, how
Um,
you perceive it.
yeah, but then there's the issue of I think some religions have tried to tackle with this, but like, how do you live a good life as a peaceful person, but also be constantly aware of the sociopaths who are a part of this world and work around that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
And also the complete opposite of sociopaths, the almost abusively artistic people who have no value in terms of survival. I mean,
Practically speaking, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But here's the thing: I don't think it's I don't think that obviously we're not striving for perfection here, and I think that
yeah,
you know there it can exist that people are different, and you know what I mean. But I think to harness people's sort of like abilities, you're not going to do it with a strict ideology and dogma of like what we've seen in the West, and you're not going to do it with you know a strict
laissez-faire attitude either.
political political agenda, which would be the East, right? Like I said, the Eastern philosophies they're great because they deal with individual well-being, but they don't necessarily deal with political structures and complex socioeconomic you know catastrophes or you know whatever you want to call it.
It's
So like
I read a book of the apparently the first white man to enter Tibet. He wrote a whole book on it. It's fantastic. He was escaping, I think, war in India. He escaped a prison camp there, but he talked about the culture there in a very funny way. They're like a large part of the population are monks, and but these people, they just trying to do architecture, build a new building. If they found a worm in the dirt that they were digging at, they would stop the whole construction, and they would be freaking out, and they would move the worm away, and they would like make sure that it was like in like a pile of dirt, and they would like walk off with the pile of dirt with the worm, and like they didn't touch it directly because they knew that the salt on her skin is not pleasant for the worm, and they would like put it down somewhere else, and it made it completely impossible to build new stuff because it took forever.
yeah, so obviously there's a balance issue, right?
Yeah.
Like, but that's not. I don't think that that's. Here's the thing. Sorry. I think there's a compromise that we can use, right? Like obviously, what is all the wealth that capitalism has brought us has also brought us difficulty to enjoy the wealth that we've created. So what's the point, right? Um, so there's a balance that you need to achieve there, and I think it's possible. Like you know what I mean? Like I said, the with the call center sort of example, if you try to you know incorporate a corporate culture type means of bringing the art back into the job, which is you know kind of ludicrous if you think about it, because someone was calling to get the computer fixed. Well, they really don't give a fuck if you're being artistic about it, right? But if you get to you know like I said, if there's art on the walls and there's video games in the lunchroom and a pool table and all this kind of stuff, that doesn't bring the art back into the job. That's just a novelty, right? It's trivial. But if you, for example, you know, instead of just doing that, if you make it so that people have to call in and see you face to face, like that is bringing the art back into the job, right? You're making it more human.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a compromise that's possible, and that won't make things out of whack, right? I mean, it might get less people calling in because they don't want their faces seen. But if your face is at least seen, and you know, and the person chooses not to have their face seen when they call in, at least you know that you're being watched and that you can be more human instead of just droning on the fucking phone, right? So, you know, I'm sure that
Yeah.
there would be some kind of loss of profits somewhere somehow because of this system, but at the
It's
cost of
hard to say, man, because there is a lot of research in the whole idea that like people who have like um, mindfulness practice at like once a day at work, they have higher productivity rates. It's a weird balance because you can overdo it. You can be like too lenient on your employees, and then they start producing less. You give them a way too high quality of life,
yeah,
and
this
but
is what I'm
on
saying.
the other end, it can help. It can actually a little bit can actually boost productivity enormously.
Yeah, but here I'm not talking about taking away or giving more. I'm talking about changing how you do things. Like I said, if you give your employees some kind of meditation, you know, class at the beginning of the week, sure, it might boost your profits somehow or whatever, make people happy. But like I said, I'm talking about changing the way they do things, not adding or taking away. So like I said, if you introduce the fact that it's a face-to-face conversation, this isn't really taking away or adding. It's changing the way that you're doing it, and at the same time makes everything better for everybody, right?
Yeah, you ideally want to integrate it into as many things as possible, right?
Yeah. So, but to get back to the
Ideally.
practical manifest, I've structured it in a manner where we have to deal with art and organization as two things, and then morality falls under that category as well. Because when you are performing or manifesting your art or your organization, in the context for organization, I use it as what I mean by organization is everything that we do for survival, not just as for individuals, but as societies, get things running. So, um, to reiterate that example, like I said, you could build a house for shelter that's necessary for survival, but there's a reason for why you chose to put your house next to a lake where it's beautiful, and why you chose to, use a certain color brick because that's the artistic aspect. So, obviously though, when you're building that house as a necessity for survival, the organization part, and you're being artistic about it, there's a morality that kicks in there as well, because maybe you're building your house on a dam and you're going to fuck up the ecosystem because you've got beavers there or whatever, right? So like, there's a morality that needs to be sort of like fleshed out, and we have to understand how that applies as well
Yeah,
to
I could,
art
I mean,
and organization.
because there's an artistry or sacredness to morality, but there's also practicality.
Oh, that's beautiful. You just blew my fucking mind. Yes, that's where the paradox kicks in. That's how we crystallize the paradox, right? Can you
Hmm.
repeat that?
Morality has an artistry, but also a practical aspect.
Exactly, and that's the see, that's why morality is such a paradox. It's like, well, Sam Harris in his TED talk about science and morality really made it like he really made it clear when he sort of compared the way that we visualize and treat women, or at least how we how our societies operate with when it comes to female nudity or the female body. And it's like, on the one hand, you see like, women who are wearing burqas, and it seems horrible because their sort of humanity is at stake in a sense, because they're not able to interact face to face. You know what I mean? Which is why a lot of countries are making it illegal to wear burqas and that kind of stuff. Technically like inhumane, but also it's hot and all this kind of stuff. And then yet we have the opposite, which is like, Western society, where you have, girls who are practically naked. You're seeing like La Senza, commercials with girls that look like they're 14 wearing like lingerie. It's like, well, why are you sexualizing young girls? And you know what I mean? So like both extremes don't seem very moral. But then at the same time, it's like, well, there's a paradox there. It's like, well, which one is more right than the other? Well, obviously, I think there's a better balance between the two that we can achieve, like Sam Harris is making like statements. But when it comes to the compromise of better balance, that's when we get the problems, because then it'll be like, okay, well, she's wearing a regular shirt, but she's got a little bit of cleavage showing. You're inevitably going to get people who are going to say, well, there's cleavage there. And then you're going to be other people saying, well, you're sexualizing cleavage. It should be normal. So that paradox, the paradox that you
Yo,
just,
man, just
the,
velvet
the,
sweatpants and hoodie. Just fucking everyone. That's what everyone gets.
yeah, we should all just Costco it up. Yeah. But the paradox that you just crystallized is exactly what we need to keep in mind to sort of regulate that teeter-totter when we do reach a better compromise. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that
So
was
I'm just
beautiful.
I'm just imagining a whole society wearing sweatpants and pullover hoodies.
Oh,
It's
that's good, dude. I love it.
just gray. Like,
Yeah,
and there's a few different shades of gray based off of your different like social classes or occupations.
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. But that's beautiful, dude. That's beautiful. So that maxim, see, you know how people say shit like, love is the answer or whatever? Well, that's the kind of maxim that we need now in our society. It's something like that. Repeat it one more time, please.
All right, morality has an aspect of artistry, but also practicality.
Exactly. Like morality is composed of artistry and practicality.
Yeah,
That's a
and
beautiful maxim.
I again, I mean, this works when you're using your a definition of artistry meaning anything that's not directly related to survival,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. It does. It does. Um, oh, dude, it's really exciting stuff. It's really exciting stuff. So the last component of practicality when it comes to paradoxism is obviously the self and the singularity. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau with the Social Contract, which is a book that is amazing. Um, he basically kind of resumes what I want to look into again, which is that gradient, like the individual versus the society, and we're actually fighting that right now, politically speaking, right? We've got like leftism versus, the polarization of the politics right now, right? Like identity politics and all that kind of stuff. That has to do with the self versus the society, right?
Yeah.
So that's also, so we need to be able to integrate an understanding of paradoxism, right? And existentialism, right? That existence is its own essence, and accept that the paradoxes, and understand that these complex concepts that causes conflicts. Wow, it's a lot of talk. They are in actuality paradoxes that we can better sort of better understand if we were to realize such paradoxes. And then if we, with that knowledge, with that realization, return to a better balance, a better compromise when it comes to art and organization, we can therefore, sort of like be better equipped to deal with the problem of the self versus the society, because those are the complexities that we really need to get down to, and we're just muddling through the mud. It's just so messy, I mean, we're trying to deal with these complex problems of the economy and different social groups and classes and inequalities, but like we can't figure that stuff out unless we go to the root, and the root is look, existence is a paradox. Here's how we can understand it. Here's how we can come together and be at peace with it. And then, we take the general principles of art and organization. We try to merge them together for well-being. Then we can attack these greater issues.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some people really don't give a shit about well-being. But
No.
yeah.
So that's why I'm thinking like the intellectual dark web, like Jordan Peterson, he's dealing with these issues, right? He understands the psychology of the masses in a way that's sophisticated enough so that he can make concrete the notions that freedom of speech and reinforcing the individual ultimately does lead to a better society. But obviously, those societies are also at risk of totalitarian corruption and all this kind of stuff, and it still doesn't wipe away the inequalities that we need to deal with. So, like I said, I think ultimately speaking, we can better compromise and attack those things if we do understand that we all have the same values, we all have the same existence, we all sort of understand everything the same way. It's just from a different, axiomatic perspective.
I've heard you say that a few times, and I gotta say that can be a trap because there are people who really don't have the same values as most people. There really, really are, and they can come in and gunk up the wheels a bit, the gears.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Anyways.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to, I don't know, go to sleep.
Yeah, I've been yawning a lot the last.
I'm getting pretty tired too, but I think it's a good way to talk about the next podcast, which should probably be what did we say? Indoctrination and
yeah, propaganda.
Yeah, indoctrination and propaganda, because we can see how it has to do, the root of that, of the problem of indoctrination is obviously education, and I'm gonna have to make you listen to that podcast where Mark Rubin talks to this professor who used to be like a super hardcore feminist activist, and she laid it out so clear, man. She's like, okay, listen, the the indoctrination of the left to our kids has been around ever since they infiltrated, the schools. So if you've got politically leaned to the left sort of like administration, well, they're going to teach that political sort of like ideology instead of being a structure, a platform for political activity. That's where we need to understand the balances here, right? That universities should be platforms for political activity, for the young to figure it out for themselves. But
Okay,
if the
that's how
administration,
paradoxism, anyways,
yeah,
could apply to university culture or academia
exactly, right?
in general.
Yeah, we need the those who know better, who have already figured out certain things in life, the administration, the teachers, to allow the students to teach themselves, right?
Yeah,
For
teach
political
people
activity
how to
anyway.
learn, learn how to learn as
Critical thought,
opposed to learn.
exactly.
Yeah,
Teach them critical thought, not your own political ideology and life sort of worldviews. You know what I mean?
and
Because then,
that's the fun part of like philosophy. It's because okay, then you ask these questions to all these kids, and then they start working with it, right? And they start asking questions and giving answers and different hypotheses. And then the people who have heard these conversations a million times before and have studied these conversations and arguments in the past, they can say, yes, but this argument comes into play here. And then they develop until everyone is at the forefront of the world conversation, which that's the thing.
exactly.
That's the hard part here because there are people who are so far down the logical route that they might sound crazy to other people or people don't understand them at all. But most people are at different levels of the conversation. Just that's how simple
Yep.
it is, really. Yeah. It's not to say that
Well, I
we're
mean,
at the end either, but
yeah, but the thing is that I think not necessarily. I think maybe there's a growing movement of people who are on the same level of conversation because of that indoctrination, right? Because these kids that are have been indoctrinated for a certain amount of years, well, when they finish school, they hit the job market and they become lawyers, teachers themselves. They become, people in our society in different areas of life. And so, you know, they take their ideologies with them, this radical sort of worldview, and then makes political correctness something that is horrible. Because see, political correctness, again, is a paradoxical notion that is necessary. Political correctness, it's misleading because it's not actually political. It's pre-political. It's necessary in the sense to
it's cultural and social.
well, basically, what it does is it serves to regulate free speech without legislating it. It's kind of saying, okay, we all agree as a society that we don't want to use these words because we want a more polite, civilized society, right?
Yeah.
So it's like an entente. But the moment that you legislate it, then it's no longer political correctness. It's political legislation, and then that's compelled speech, and that's thought policing, and then it causes all these sort of totalitarian, paradoxical notions like we're anti-racism because we know that you're in a specific intersectional racial group, right? You know, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. So.
Well, and that's the scary thing is that, I mean, if a government has any kind of influence on academia or culture, the media, the arts, then they can start putting in certain themes into
Yeah,
these institutions, which slowly moves people into the framework, the visual framework, where they start, being politically correct, as in they start ostracizing people for doing certain things that are framed in the cultural narrative as bad, and then it slowly becomes state legislation, which it comes full circle, and then the government has power over things. So
exactly.
it's
It's it's a cycle, vicious cycle. So we need to use good paradoxes to obliterate these negative paradoxes. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
that's an interesting connection between the paradoxism to the indoctrination
yeah.
concept.
It yeah. Well, that's the thing. It seems like a far stretch, but if paradoxism gets established very well and sort of is understood very well, I think people we'll be able to start creating this sort of like paradoxical movement, to use good paradox and to understand, what I mean, the world around us. Because ultimately speaking, things are getting faster and faster. We're too reactive instead of being proactive, and even at this point, because things are happening so fast and we're trying to be proactive, so we're like trying to gauge what the future is going to be like so that we're doing the right decisions now, it's actually negative because we're being proactive decisively in manners that are actually probably worse for the future. So we're in this paradoxical time crunch. And so the only solution has to be another paradox, man. And it's the worldview. And you got to use good paradoxes to defeat the bad ones.
And something I want to say is when we talk about paradox, we're not talking about I know we started with this sort of, but we're not talking about inherent contradiction where, like, I have to draw a line when someone says there's no such thing as truth, and I ask, is that the truth? And at that point, you can't say it is. It simply
Yeah,
isn't because it's self-refuting. It's like when people try to use logical arguments to argue against logic.
yeah, exactly.
It's
But
self-refuting. We're
the
not talking
point
about
is,
that. We're not talking about that.
yeah, no, what we're talking about, to use that same example, is that paradox points out that there are some truths and they both exist. That's the point. The paradox proves that both are possible and impossible at the same time. That there may very well be an absolute truth and that there's no truth, but that in itself may not be. So if you understand that, then you can navigate the world a little bit better and less rigid. You can be more fluid, you know what I mean, with other people. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the paradoxes in themselves. We're talking about what the paradoxes can do to our method of thought or thinking.
But okay, because see, this is the next step I want to take. Now there's more and more extreme relativism and postmodernism in our culture, like people saying, "Well, I want to be identified as a baseball cap," right? So,
Yeah,
I mean, according to your philosophy, since everything's a paradox, I can both be a baseball cap and a human being. So
yeah. Dodgers
I'm a
today,
baseball
Yankees
cap,
tomorrow.
huh?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there
Dodgers
has to
today.
be a line drawn because there are distinctions. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It,
No, of course. See,
there's no
like,
paradox
see,
there.
when people ask me if I'm a moral relativist, I tell them. So this sounds really verbose. We were saying that the other day, and kind of preposterous, but it's called metaethical relativism. And basically, what that means is that I'm relativist to a certain point. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
the relative about being relative. It's kind of like, okay,
exactly.
well, um, I don't know about the example I normally use, but that makes sense, right? Do I need an example, or can you come up with a good example where it's kind of like I have to be moral? Okay, so here's one. I'm morally relative in the sense that I agree that people should believe what they want to believe, right? Obviously, I want to fight against bad ideas that I believe are bad ideas. That's my belief. So you've got, Orthodox Jews who, for New York, for example, they educate their women to the levels of a 14-year-old. So these little girls grow up and they only get educated to the level of 14-year-old. You know, morally speaking, I believe in feminist, rights, female rights. I want women to be educated as equally as everybody else. But at the same time, these people have their culture. This is a very contextual thing. Do you know what I mean? That's why the feminists aren't attacking it. Could be a PR issue. Let's just say, we don't want to see anti-Semites, and this is more of a corporation than an actual movement. That's why I hate feminism nowadays. It's not real feminism. Feminism used to be fucking brave. They used to say, fuck what people think. We don't care about PR issues. This isn't a corporation. This is not a business. We want to stir the pot. We want what's right, the truth. And the truth is that I gotta be morally relative up to a point on this one, guys. Like, I think that the individualistic sort of like rights of a human child, which is like a woman, like a female child, is more important than the contextual sort of cultural relative morality of her environment. You know what I mean? Just because she's Jewish and she has her culture and her past and her history doesn't mean that we should allow for her individuality to be stamped on. I'm sorry. So I'm relative to a certain point. Like I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, it's relative. I mean, she's Jewish. What can I say? It's okay because she's Jewish? No, not okay.
Yeah.
Not okay.
Well, I mean, there are frameworks in this universe.
Yeah.
Uh, Earlier you're talking about in the first part you're talking about chaos and order, but I mean, I see the universe as mostly ordered. It has a very strong sense of structure, and you can't just say that it's empiricism versus faith. There are things in between. There's mathematics, for example, which isn't entirely provable through purely empiricist means,
Yeah.
but it's almost transcendental in many aspects. But it
Yeah.
allows us to practically be used in
Yeah.
our day-to-day
But
lives. Yeah,
you're right. But what I mean is that we need to accept both extremes as being not probable or possible,
yeah,
but
or
inevitably
complete.
so, or complete. They're inevitably so. They exist. You know, they necessitate each other. It's all encompassed. That's why I use the extremes. But you're absolutely right. We have to deal with the in between, like the mathematics. This is very good, very well said. Very well said.
Well, and philosophy and metaphysics are and logic and
Exactly.
epistemology are all in between.
They're all in that spectrum. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Hmm.
Um, I gotta go in about 10 minutes, but can we follow through on that thought? Because you're saying it wasn't completely true that empiricism. Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Oh, the fact that empiricism, you can't pure empiricism can't prove mathematics. You can't get derive mathematics out of pure empiricism, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're
No.
talking about.
No, earlier than that, you said something you kind of disagree.
Uh,
Um, anyway, I had a tangent on that. It was kind of important, but
God damn it.
the, yeah, the point is, I think we've sort of established a good platform here that I think people should kind of give us their
Their feedback.
feedback. You know what I mean? Like, I think this has to grow. It's not. But do you agree? Do you agree with most of what I've said?
Yeah, for sure. I want more metaphors. I want more practical aspects.
Yeah.
More, and maybe not even just practical aspects, but visualizations. Like the
Yeah.
fact, like putting some of these things on spectrums, like faith and empiricism, existence, non-existence, and like just like pure materialism and like intense like esotericism.
Hmm.
Um, and also graph like what might exist in between the two somewhere and how those things are good things that can be applied to life. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, no, I want to unpack it more, like a whole lot more.
Yeah, no, for sure. I want to see, like, that's just so great talking to you because you actually forge these paradoxes. You know what I mean? You're actually forging them, which is fucking great, right? You're able to link it to. I made this joke to a friend yesterday. I was like, yeah, you know, Oliver, it's like the angles to my Marx. You know, I know it's strange that we're saying that because we're totally not into the communist thing, but you know, I believe that his intentions were ultimately great. You know what I mean? He was a smart guy. But their relationship,
I don't
I was
know.
equating.
I mean, the stuff I've read about Marx might be biased, but God, he did some shitty stuff. He did some really shitty things.
You did.
Yeah.
I know. But um, you know, the point is, when I say that, I think like I'm thinking about the specific relationship he had with Engels, right? See, if Friedrich Engels was a better writer than Marx. Marx had great ideas, but he didn't know how to transmit them very like to ground them as well. And so Engels would write a lot for him, a lot of this stuff, and he didn't get credited for it very well, unfortunately. But Engels was really what made it happen. And I think there's in history this has happened a lot. Like Isaac Newton, I think the reason for why the theory of gravity I think came about, or calculus. I think it was what's his name now? there's another scientist who basically made it happen, and the scientist almost like lost his livelihood almost, you know, to try to make, Isaac Newton's papers sort of, kind of.
Oh yeah, I remember this. I forget his name, but
Yeah, he got paid in like fish test, like it was like a sort of catalog of fish, and he got paid in with this book. It's kind of like dictionary. Um, that's how he got paid, apparently, because the institute that he was working for was just kind of going broke. They didn't have the money to print and you know publicize Newton's work. So it's really due to this guy who just kept pushing that Newton's work really kind of came about.
mm.
So anyway, there seems to be a lot of, and of course I forget his name, and that's the point, right? Like I feel like well, there's other scenarios where people, you know, both got the fame, respectively. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I should use a different example. I'm gonna find one.
We'll find one. We'll find one.
Find one. Yeah. And I'm
Um,
not necessarily the Marx. You maybe
that's
you're
fuck.
the Marx.
I mean,
I'm working on yours.
maybe we'll switch roles here and there, but I mean
I know this is evolving.
I think it's funny. It's been a very common theme in my life that I act as a bridge between,
Yeah.
especially between two different forms of communication. Like from an early age, I had to translate my parents, one speaking English, one speaking French, when they were in fights, and they would get in fights over some basic misunderstanding because of the language. So
Wow. And you rectified that. That's
yeah,
so
I think I was
interesting.
like 5 first time I remember doing that.
Wow, that's pretty cool, dude.
And
Holy shit.
yeah, I like to do that with groups of friends too, because I never really had like one group of friends. I had a lot of different circles, and then I would introduce people from different groups, and then it would all fall apart. But
Yeah. And that's why you take on the role of the skeptic, right? You test people. Test people. You're not,
Socratic method, man, I'm all about that shit.
I know, I love it. I love the Socratic method. Socrates, it's cool. There you go. There you go. You're the Socrates to my Plato.
Dope.
Yeah, I'm much happier with that one. Yeah,
Yeah, that's better. I like
yeah,
Plato.
yeah, yeah. You're the Socrates to my Plato. All right, bro. I'm gonna let you go. That's a perfect
Yeah,
enough.
it's time.
Take care, man.
Yeah, you too.
Talk.
Night, everybody. We're gonna pass the fuck out.